The old adage is that the transfer portal giveth and it taketh, and in this case, it taketh from the BYU football program.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The motto is your team every day, and as such, this is your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU, and we are brought to you today by our friends over at Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of our friends at Monopoly Go. The mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or on Google Play. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. And the NCAA Transfer Portal window closed yesterday, April 30th. So it is signed, it is sealed, it is delivered, meaning the NCAA Transfer Portal, if anybody hasn't entered their name into the portal, they are now essentially stuck until the next portal window opens. Now, there is a rule that's going to be coming into effect in the relatively near future about graduate transfers and them having to declare before the final window closes. But if you do graduate, there is still that loophole that you can declare at any point and enter the NCAA Transfer Portal that way. But for underclassmen, those who are not graduating, yesterday was the final day to enter the NCAA Transfer Portal, and BYU had a handful of guys go into the portal, one of which stands out above the rest, and that is Danny Saili, who has entered the NCAA Transfer Portal. He made this statement on social media, quote, "I want to start off this by thanking BYU for taking a chance on me, giving me an opportunity to play at this level. I want to thank Coach Bua for coaching me these past months. With that being said, I'll be entering my name into the transfer portal with 2 years of eligibility." Now, those of you who remember Danny Saili, when he signed with BYU, he had committed and then decommitted from Oklahoma, then committed to Texas Tech, decommitting from Tech, and then ultimately agreeing to sign with BYU, signs with the Cougars, and had recently gone through spring drills with the BYU football program. He was not a full participant during spring camp for BYU football, but it was evident that he was going to be a part of the two deep at minimum for BYU along that defensive line, in particular at the defensive tackle spot. And I thought that he was a potential star in the making for the BYU football program. Alas, he has decided that his future, at least at this juncture, is better suited elsewhere. And I will say this, I wish him nothing but the best as he tries to find the right situation for himself. It's going to be an interesting dynamic to see where he ultimately lands, because this is a dude, speaking of Saili, who, as I love to call it, is a space eater when it comes to football. And what that means is he is 6'3", 370 some odd pounds, and he is just one of those guys you have a hard time moving wherever he is at on the football field. It takes 2 and 3 offensive linemen to uproot a guy like that and get them out of the spot. And that's what you want along your defensive front, especially at defensive tackle, and especially in the defense that Jay Hill is running for BYU. You need to have guys who are those quote-unquote space eaters in the middle, that they can just chew up blocks and take on double and triple teams and hold their ground. Danny, in the limited reps that I saw him out there, showed that ability, but also showed some tenacity and some ability to pass the rusher as well. I can remember at least one whistle sack that I saw during media observation during spring ball that showed his agility despite being a man of such a large size. So I think this is there's no doubt that this is a loss for the BYU football program to have Danny Saili exiting the program at this juncture. He spent less than 4 months, all told, or maybe just over 4 months with BYU, and now is looking for his next opportunity. And like I said, I wish him nothing but the best, but there is just no denying that this is a blow for BYU, especially along a defensive front that was being rebuilt essentially wholesale this offseason. Are there still bodies there that can hold up in his absence? Yes, there are, but there is nobody, and I mean nobody on that roster for BYU who has the same size that Danny Saili brought to the table, and that's something that I think BYU is going to miss out on when it comes to their second year in the Big 12 Conference. I am hopeful that they will find adequate replacements, maybe a replacement or replacements in the portal to maybe bring in a body or two to help stabilize that position group via the portal now that Danny Saili is exiting. But at the same time, This is a guy, like I said, when Oklahoma, Texas Tech, a handful of other Power 4/Big 12 schools were firmly in the mix to sign this kid, you can tell that there is talent there that programs were looking to bring in, and it's unfortunate that is going to be elsewhere that he goes. Does he go back maybe to Tech or to an Oklahoma? Maybe so, and we'll update you if any of that news as it continues to roll in here, but that is a blow for BYU. Now, the other guys who entered the NCAA transfer portal yesterday were not necessarily of the same ilk, speaking of the impact that they will have, in my mind, on the BYU football program as they exit the program. First up is Ryder Burton, the former Springville star quarterback. Did not see time last year for BYU as a freshman. He has announced that he's entered the portal with 4 years remaining. It looked like it was just writing was on the wall for this young man. He was buried on the depth chart. You had 2 transfers come in and supplant him immediately in the depth chart. And with how many quarterbacks were already on the roster for BYU, it just was a hard time to see that. It was a hard read to get on Ryder Burton as to if his future was going to be at BYU. And I think when McKay Hillstead initially agreed to come to BYU last week, I think that essentially said everything that Ryder Burton needed to know about his place with the BYU football program. And it's disappointing because Ryder was a prolific quarterback during his high school days. And similar to what I just talked about with Danny Saley, I wish him nothing but the best moving forward. Another Utah prep standout that is leaving BYU as well as Devin Downing. Now, Downing's an interesting situation. Originally, had been a guy that BYU signed before going on a mission, then returned from that mission, found out he was without a scholarship at that point. It had essentially been allocated elsewhere. He agreed to walk on, and it made some impressions for BYU, especially in this past spring ball. I'd seen a number of plays from him that stood out, but he, similar to Ryder Burton, was firmly down the depth chart and looking for an opportunity to play. I can't fault any of these young men. Speaking of Ryder Burton, Devin Downing, we'll talk about Chaz here momentarily. I can't fault any of them for wanting to go find places that they can play. These are all young men who are competitive. By and large, they were the best, if not one of the best on their high school teams. They have been used to being a star player, to having an outsized role in the programs that they have come from to the Power 4 level. Well, guess what? When you get to this level, the funnel just really kind of siphons off a lot of the would-be's out there, or the wannabes, I guess I should say. And it's everybody essentially on the roster alongside you was one of, if not the star player on their high school team. And guess what? The best of the best will rise to the top of that competition. Other guys are going to have to go find other opportunities for themselves. So I wish Ryder and Devin nothing but the best. Now, the Chaz Ayu situation, I'm frankly stunned that he's in the NCAA transfer portal. Count me among those that thought that Chaz, after a medical hardship / red shirt, as well as another just regular red shirt, how has he still got eligibility? But as our good friend Kurt Johnson, who does a lot of preps work, Utah KJ on Twitter, he responded to my tweet saying that count me among those who are surprised he still has eligibility. He says, I'm convinced that the transfer portal has a time machine attached to it, and it very well may. Remember, Chaz Ayu, remember that famous commitment video made to BYU flying in on the helicopter? Just about made a faux pas that my son would love. He calls them helicopters. So, Colton, you got dad to make a faux pas on his podcast. You'll be happy to hear that. But nonetheless, he flew on a helicopter in 2017. It's been a long road for Chaz. And let me be very clear. He has endured a number of injuries. He has never really had a fully healthy season. And I am fingers crossed that wherever he lands in this transfer portal saga for one more year, at least, it looks like for him eligibility wise, that he can go out and have a healthy season and play out his college career the way that he wants to. It's crazy to consider that Chaz in 2024 will still be playing college football, but hey, welcome to the NIL transfer portal and COVID era at its max. Because what is Chaz? Let's see, 17, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is he an 8th year senior? Something like that. Crazy scenes, but I wish all 4 of these young men nothing but the best. And by the way, there's still a chance there could be more guys from BYU who enter the portal. The portal, you only have to enter by April 30, and it can take up to 48 hours for the paperwork and the process to go through. So in the next 2 days, anybody else who may have filed at the very last minute with regards to the transfer portal, you may hear their name pop up between now and then. If anybody else does pop up, we'll discuss their impact. But I think the Danny Saley loss for BYU, it is absolutely a hit for that defensive line for BYU. The other four at the same time, the other three, excuse me, I should say. The other three, you can absorb those losses. And frankly, I'm not surprised by any of them exiting the program at this juncture because, frankly, they're just looking for time and an opportunity to develop their game. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to talk about the Jaxson Robinson situation at BYU. I had a couple of you reach out and say, Jake, what do you know about this? You've been talking a lot about you not expecting Jaxson Robinson to come back to BYU regardless after how last season went. I'll explain more about what I'm calling the Jaxson Robinson dilemma is. Is there a chance he can still come back to BYU? Absolutely. Do I expect it? Not so much. We'll talk about that next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys to have fun. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL and their playoffs, and then FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own, my friends. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus with any winning $5 bet. Think about that. $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and many, many more features, and it's all available to you with any winning $5 bet. It's $5 out of your pocket. You win it, $150 in your account, and you're off and rolling with our friends at FanDuel. The best part is, even if you're not into the NBA or NHL, you want to bet on baseball, you want to do football futures with regards to college or NFL, you can do all of that with our friends at FanDuel. It's on an app that's absolutely incredible, simple, and easy to use. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count right now, my friends. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon to make those opportunities an opportunity for you. $150 richer with any winning $5 bet. It's all courtesy of FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Are you sick of watching Fox Sports and ESPN and hearing all the talking heads screaming at each other and having to turn down the volume or mute it just because you can't handle it? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming going on elsewhere. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube and also on the Amazon Free Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, of course, your team every day. All right. So Jaxson Robinson is a curious case. And what I mean by that is Jaxson is a guy that BYU basketball has benefited from having him in their program. And it has been a really fun rise for him to watch him kind of morph from this transfer, a two-time transfer before he lands at BYU. And you're wondering, okay, can he live up to the 4-star billing he had coming out of high school and the prep ranks? And as his game evolved at BYU, saw flashes at times and saying, okay, that's why people were so high on him coming out of high school. Oh, there's another look at it. And then this past season, it seemed to come together in large doses. He was the 6th man of the year for the in the Big 12 for the BYU basketball room. A huge reason why BYU finished 5th in the Big 12 conference. Well, I said back in January, I talked with some folks who were more in the know on the basketball front when it comes to how guys are feeling about things. And they told me unequivocally, they said, Jake, Jaxson Robinson is done at BYU after this season. And I said, okay, was that the NBA draft? Because at that point, he was absolutely balling out and he continued to ball out. But they said, it could be NIL, it could be the NBA, but he will not be playing for BYU next season. I do think that assertion I made in the report, I guess I made on this podcast, still is valid today. I am still fully expecting Jaxson Robinson to pursue his NBA dreams. This is a young man who's got the length and athleticism and the shot to go with it that screams to me a true 3-and-D guy at the NBA level. Now, is it probably going to be as a second-round pick? Most likely. And it makes it so he has to work his way up through the G League, but he is still making NBA-level money. And I know that NIL can balance a lot of that out. Regardless, professional basketball means you're focused on one thing, basketball. If you are playing college basketball, there's this little thing called school that's also involved. You have to go to class. You have to fill out paperwork. You have to write papers and the like. And that's something that some guys just frankly get bored of and get over. I think all of us. I got to my senior year at BYU, and trust me, I was one of those guys. A lot of people go to school for 7 years. Yeah, they're called doctors, Richard. Here's the thing. I was working full-time in radio for the final 4 years of my college career. But regardless, You look at the situation for Jaxson Robinson, and it is going to be interesting to see what his ultimate decision is. He originally announced he's entering the NBA draft. A couple days later, reports come out from ESPN, and he indicated to ESPN he's entering the transfer portal to examine his options should he decide to opt to play another year in the college sphere. I still believe that Jaxson Robinson's time in Provo, Utah is over with this one caveat. Kevin Young, as I talked about it on yesterday's podcast, has got this golden Midas touch. Can he go to meet with Jaxson Robinson and say, okay, here's the deal. I work with Devin Booker. I work with Chris Paul. They are confidants of mine. I have really helped them elevate their game at the NBA level. I think I can do the same thing for you. Look at Kevin Durant. I worked with him this past year for the Phoenix Suns. I know what KD can do. I think we can bring the best out of you. Could that change the conversation for Jaxson Robinson? I believe it could, but you've got to get on that right now because the deadline for withdrawing your name from the NBA draft is coming up pretty quick, and you've got to be able to make that decision and announce what you're doing pretty quickly. The other thing is what NIL figure is it going to take for Jaxson Robinson to say, you know what, I'll come back to BYU for another year? That's a big question because I have been told that there are multiple NIL offers, one of them being Kansas. I will say that right now, right out of the gate, that have offered north of 7 figures. That's millions of dollars, folks. For Jaxson Robinson to play for these programs. We all know that Kentucky, if you look at his mentions on any of his social media channels, hashtag BBN, standing for Big Blue Nation, or Kentucky Wildcat fans are going absolutely you-know-what crazy about potentially luring him to Lexington to play for Mark Pope. He'd be only the second defection from BYU, joining Colin Chandler with regards to joining Mark Pope down there in Lexington. And he'd do well because I'm sure that Kentucky can pay a pretty penny to him NIL-wise. And also, it gives him an opportunity to potentially start for Mark Pope next year and really show what he can do at a very high level and at a program, speaking of Kentucky, that is going to be as scrutinized and as closely monitored as anybody with regards to NBA talent, etc. So there is a lot of moving parts with Jaxson Robinson. I believe, just reading between the lines, in his heart of hearts, he wants to pursue his dreams in the NBA and he wants to do it now. But if you look at some of the mock drafts, they don't even have him in the top 60 picks of the NBA draft. It's 2 rounds, 60 picks, 30 teams. Okay, there may be a chance that he just simply isn't going to be drafted in the NBA. Does that force him to go the G League route? Does he have to go overseas to live his professional hopes? And can he get back into the NBA via that route? That's something he's got to weigh here. Could he also go back to school for another year, finish up a degree or start another degree while making north of $1 million+ in NIL? That is all something that has got to come into the mix. And his familiarity with BYU obviously plays to their advantage. But Kevin Young's got to be able to sell him on his vision for him and what the vision for Kevin Young's BYU team is. Is Jaxson Robinson going to be playing a 6-man role once again with Kevin Young? Or can they obviously morph the lineup here where maybe a Jaxson Robinson, Richie Saunders, a tandem works together on the wing for BYU this year as 2 starters alongside Dallin Hall in that backcourt? There's a lot of unanswered questions, and I don't envy anybody for trying to break down what Jaxson Robinson is going to do. I've had some Kentucky fans. I saw Jeff Hansen actually tweet about this. He said, hey, Kentucky fans who have followed me in the last couple of days, if you believe I'm going to be the guy that's going to break the news about Jaxson Robinson going to Kentucky, you're going to be severely disappointed. I will also say that for any Kentucky fan who happens to be watching and or listening to the sound of my voice, I don't have the inside intel that will tell me that Jaxson Robinson is Lexington bound. He's going to stick with his NBA route. He's coming back to BYU, or it's elsewhere that he goes when it comes to maybe transferring elsewhere. The nice part is for if you're Jaxson, there is every option on the table. A return to BYU with a potential addition of NIL and a new coach who's got this big rep as an offensive just genius in the NBA as your head coach at the program you were a star for. Can you go with your old coach to Kentucky, step into a leadership / starting role for one of the most storied college basketball programs in the entire country? Can you cash in on NIL at any one of a number of other universities and essentially get your meal ticket paid for in a very handsome way for another year? Or do you just opt to say, you know what, I want to focus solely on one thing, and that one thing is basketball, and you give your heart and soul to that, and you move forward with your dreams of playing in the NBA? all those options are available for Jaxson Robinson. But right now, I still believe that the NBA is where he is leaning towards. But if you're him, it's good to have options. All those are in his back pocket, and nobody's going to be able to really speed him up outside of that deadline coming up with regards to withdrawing your name from the NBA draft if you are going to stay in the draft / exit it and go elsewhere when it comes to your college basketball career. It's a crazy, crazy time, and I understand he's probably got a ton of people in his mentions, as it were, saying, hey, you should do this, hey, you should do that. But the only guy who at the end of the day can decide what his future is going to be is Jaxson Robinson. I would love to have him back at BYU, but I'm telling you, I've been a broken record on this. I have been told that his future is outside of Provo, whether that's in the NBA or that's with another college basketball program cashing in on NIL. And until that decision ultimately changes, maybe a return to BYU happens, I will happily eat crow, but I'm sitting still firmly on the Jaxson Robinson to the NBA train until otherwise notified. All right, we will finish up today's podcast with an interesting dilemma emerging from some negotiations of an interesting court case that could affect literally millions of dollars and impact athletes at the collegiate level more so financially than even NIL could have ever dreamed of. And we'll talk about what that is coming up next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monopoly Go. Now, game off. We got to pause here for just a minute to talk about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You've already talked about that. You talk about it all the time, Jake. Stop talking about it. But the best part is there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you go and work together to build each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much more to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes as well. Cool new playing pieces to travel all the boards with. You play on literally hundreds of different boards rather than the old Monopoly game where you stuck on just one board. Hilarious emojis from taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults when you turn your back on them. So the best part is Monopoly Go has got a new feel every single day and exciting new changes with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasures on a robot pachinko machine. There's always new timed events to help you win big, massive multipliers for everything you win and rent frenzy. So the best part is it's got a new look and a new feel literally every single day. So always something fun to discover on Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it free now on Google Play or the App Store. Once again, you can catch it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. And of course, as they like to say, game on. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you've not done so already, please consider subscribing to the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It gets you updates coming to your phone via text messages every single day. Appreciate all of you who have subscribed so far. And if you'd like to join us, 14-day free trial, click the link in the show notes below, whether you're watching and or listening to this. It's $4.99 a month afterwards. So essentially $5 a month. Like I said, updates coming to your phone directly to you via text message. Absolutely an incredible way to interact with the show. And at the same time, it's a great way to support the show along the way as well. All right. So there's an interesting thing happening here. Leaders of college sports, and it comes from an ESPN report of Dan Murphy and Pete Thamel, saying that they are in, quote, deep discussions, speaking of the leaders of these college sports, about a legal settlement would likely lay out the framework for sharing revenue with athletes in a future NCAA business model. Now, the NCAA and its power conferences, the Big 12, which BYU is a member of, are currently defendants in an antitrust class action lawsuit called House versus NCAA, which argues that the association is breaking federal law by placing any restrictions on how athletes can make money from selling the rights to their name, image, or likeness. The case is scheduled to go to court early next year, January of 2025, and if the plaintiffs win at trial, the NCAA and its schools could be liable to pay more than $4 billion, you heard that right, $4 billion with a B, in damages, which has motivated many leaders to seek a settlement on this. Now, they had a discussion, a big meeting down in Dallas last week, which essentially has come to somewhat of an agreement, or at least an early hope that there might be a way to get a settlement reached here. Now, it included NCAA President Charlie Baker, the NCAA's lawyers, the plaintiffs' attorneys all met. And the thing is that there is no deal imminent, but details about what the multi-billion-dollar settlement could look like are expected to be shared on campuses in the near future. The situation at hand is that potentially that the top end revenue share numbers per school, once it's determined, would be in the neighborhood of $20 million annually. Now, what that means is BYU, for example, could be on the hook annually to add $20 million to a pot to be distributed, revenue sharing with their players. Speaking of football, basketball, and I imagine it goes all the way down to any athlete in the BYU athletic department. And this goes for all schools in the NCAA, at least to the top end with the power conferences. The interesting part is that the individual schools, according to this report, would be able to opt in to share the revenue up to that number with their student athletes at their discretion. So obviously they could allocate more to football or to basketball and the like, but they could also choose to share less, but not more. This is an interesting dynamic. Is BYU willing to see college sports as it is right now? It's a professional model. Let's be very, very clear. The facade of amateurism has been ripped off like an old Band-Aid. And yes, it is hurt because I know a number of you out there have been less than enthused with how athletes are operating, the transfer portal. I've seen some blowback on the Danny Saili situation where he only spent 4 months in Provo. What does a commitment mean anymore? I get all the frustration. I absolutely get it. But here's the deal. Athletes at the collegiate level have been exploited for long time, for a very long time is what I should say, to use proper English, about their name, image, and likeness benefiting the schools and the conferences and the NCAA that they represent to the tune of billions, with a B, billions of dollars annually. They obviously deserve some of this. $20 million is still a relative drop in the bucket considering how much money these other conferences are making on an annual basis, but it is a good thing to see this. My question for BYU is, are the Board of Trustees, who are ostensibly the leaders of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, are they willing to get into this pool and share revenue with their athletes? I hope they are. I hope that BYU continues to stay in the college athletics sphere, but college athletics, for lack of a better term, is now professional sports. Athletes are being paid. We have Connor Pay on this podcast. I pay him via an NIL agreement. We have a contract between the two of us to have him on this show. That is what this is going to come down to, is that are these universities, A, willing to fork over this much money, up to $20 million, or at least in the vicinity of $20 million? You can share less than that, but here's the deal. The top end schools are obviously going to be going right to the max because it's a recruiting advantage. Is BYU willing to pony up $20 million annually, potentially here, to share with their athletes? We'll see, because a lot of you have been frustrated with the NIL sphere and the fact that guys can essentially just go out there and cash in and then bail. That you can, there was the Caden Proctor situation where he left Alabama, went back to Iowa where he's from, got a big hefty deal from a car dealership, essentially to the Danny Saili situation, but even shorter, went through spring camp and then bounced. And oh, by the way, I'm going back to Alabama where I originally signed, but I've got $100,000+ in the bank account that car dealership gave me. Thanks, but I'm out of here. That's a frustrating situation. The thing I've always thought was it was going to come down to what this is being proposed as, is there's revenue sharing. It's what happens in every other professional sport, the NFL, the NBA, NHL, MLB, on down the list. Athletes and their labor unions have agreed to revenue splits with the leagues that they are playing in. This is not a 50-50 share, because a lot of those labor unions, essentially, it's between 55-45 or 50-50. It's right in that range where they essentially split the profits right down the middle and they distribute it that way. The situation at hand here is up to $20 million revenue sharing. Is that enough for athletes to feel confident with where they stand, and is it enough to make them think, okay, we're getting what we deserve? But are the schools also willing to play ball on this? There is no good answer on this, and I don't think there's ever going to really be a perfect answer to all of it, unless you can get college athletes to unionize, which Dartmouth players at a private university have done so, but their situation is still pending with the National Labor, NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, whatever that is, that handles unions, about what the real situation is with Dartmouth and those men's basketball players. The interesting part is the Dartmouth situation, which could affect BYU, is that Dartmouth is unionizing, but their unionization efforts only applies under the purview of what I've understand about that law with private universities. So BYU as a private university could be affected by Dartmouth and the decisions made there, whereas other public universities wouldn't be affected by that. So there is so much of the different dynamics at play here. But I am very curious if this comes to fruition, if they do settle this and essentially it lays out a framework where the universities are essentially being told, okay, it's $20 million. You can obviously share less than that. You can't share more than that with your athletes, but that is what the future is here with the NCAA. It's revenue sharing, it's professional sports, and it's absolute crux of what all this is. Will BYU be willing to do that? Will the leaders of the LDS Church be willing to allow their flagship university to participate in what has become a professional sports environment with their athletic department? I, for one, hope they will, but I do harbor concerns that it may be something the BYU and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he said, you know what? It's a bridge too far. And for that reason, we're out. It's a very interesting dynamic. It's an interesting dynamic for college sports in general, because essentially it puts a stake right in the heart of what college athletics has aspired to be for a century plus, and essentially says, no, yeah, we are professional sports, so deal with it. This is what we are now. It's a very, very curious situation. And like I said, I don't think there's any perfect answer in any way, shape, or form. But this, speaking of revenue sharing, to me, it's moving in the better direction than what NIL was pushing college sports to be. At least the universities are having to fork over the bill rather than you, Joe fan out there, who is having to fork over money to a collective that is sharing money with these athletes. And oh, by the way, those athletes are not beholden to essentially stick around for any significant period of time after they've cashed those hefty checks to the tunes of hundreds, if not thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And it's a really, really unique situation, but one that bears watching, because I look at this and say, this is what the future I think needed to be for college athletics. Now my question is, in the BYU sense, is BYU willing to play ball? And we'll have to kind of wait and find out on that front. All right, that's where we'll leave it for today's edition of the podcast. A big thank you to all of you for your support. As always, cannot thank you guys enough for being with us. It's good to be back in the chair after a little bit of a hiatus last weekend, but hope you guys are all doing well. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Happy May to all of you. I did not make it's going to be May joke. I did at the end of the show, so there you go. But nonetheless, happy May to every one of you, and hope you guys are having a fantastic day whenever you watch and or listen to this. Once again, thank you for making your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you who are everydayers, and we will catch you guys again tomorrow right here on Locked On Cougars.